Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Windows update causing slowness and hanging of applications on some Server 2019 machines. Also, mandated multi-factor authentication for Azure accounts is on its way. And all that glitters is not gold. The recent fix for the Bitlocker recovery key prompts experienced after installing July's Windows updates has implications that may require a multi-step mitigation. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And of course, also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build application packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Starting off this week's episode with some early warnings of potential issues caused by the recent August Windows updates. Reportedly, updates are breaking dual boot on Linux systems with Secure Boot enabled. This issue is caused by Microsoft's choice to apply a Secure Boot Advanced Targeting update to block Linux bootloaders unpatched against a previous vulnerability, CVE-2022-2601. So that's previous as in older, because that was actually first recorded in 2022. And that particular vulnerability is a Grub2 Secure Boot bypass vulnerability, which could have an impact on Windows security. Currently, there's no definitive list of Linux distributions and versions affected by this known issue, and Linux users who tried working around the issue say that deleting the SBAT policy or wiping the Windows installation and restoring Secure Boot to factory settings does not work. The only apparent way to revive the device is to disable Secure Boot, install the latest version of your Linux distro, and re-enable Secure Boot. Microsoft has yet to confirm this issue, however. And it was believed that the update would not impact those who were dual booting, but according to multiple accounts, it reportedly is. So if you do dual boot, just heads up on this one. Also related to Windows Update Fallout news, several people reported that KB5041578 is causing issues on some Windows Server 2019 machines, and it results in lagging and applications becoming unresponsive at times. Clearing out the contents of the C Windows System 32 catroot2 directory seems to fix the issue. Some in the community recommend stopping the crypto services, renaming that catroot2 folder, and then restarting the crypto services before patching to prevent this issue from occurring in the first place. Also related to Windows Update Fallout news, there were early reports of a re-emergence of the Bitlocker recovery key prompts when installing the recent Windows updates. But as Eric from ZenApp blog pointed out, just make sure you eject or remove bootable media, as this can trigger a recovery key prompt. So that's just one of the protective features of Bitlocker. If it detects bootable media, it may prompt you for that recovery key because it's trying to prevent someone from maliciously reinstalling Windows and possibly formatting the drive. Microsoft has shared a workaround for a known issue affecting Microsoft 365 customers that is causing classic Outlook to crash after opening or when starting up in safe mode. Impacted users can confirm if they're affected by this specific issue by looking for event 1000 or 1001 crashes in the Windows Event Viewer application log, with a 0xC000005 exception code linked to the faulting module ucrtbase.dll. Based on user reports, the crashes impact only Office 365 accounts, and they cannot be solved by reverting to the previous build, creating a new Outlook profile, or even after a Windows clean install, so it's a pretty persistent issue. Bleepycomputer.com states you should remove the client and server rules, run the clean rules command line by closing Outlook, right-clicking the Windows Start button, selecting Run, and running an Outlook.exe /clean rules command. Hold the Shift key when starting Outlook to create a new profile, but only if necessary. On the Profile Picker dialog, click Options, check Prompt a profile to be used, then click New and proceed through the prompts. Finally, if you still have the issue, go to Outlook Web Access and manually remove all email rules. Well, it's a good thing no one ever uses email rules, I guess. Also related to Outlook, Microsoft recently shared a workaround for an issue blocking Microsoft 365 customers from signing in or adding Gmail accounts in Classic Outlook. And I'll just share a link to the article for that one if you want to see what the resolution is for yourself. And that'll be with this episode, which is episode 348 over at 5bytespodcast.com. Also confirmed and reported by many, including on this podcast, is the fact the Bitlocker recovery key prompts that were caused with July updates has indeed been eradicated. Bleepycomputer.com reports that Microsoft has disabled a fix for Bitlocker security feature bypass vulnerability due to firmware incompatibility issues that were causing patched Windows devices to go into that Bitlocker recovery mode. After disabling the fix, Microsoft advises those who want to protect their systems and data against the vulnerability CVE-2024-38058 to apply mitigation measures that were detailed in a previous advisory for KB 5025885. Unfortunately, rather than being a regular Windows update that you could just install, reboot, and everything will be fine, KB 5025885 requires a multi-stage procedure that also requires restarting the impacted device up to 8 times. Furthermore, Microsoft warns that after applying the mitigation on devices with Secure Boot, they will no longer be able to remove it, even after reformatting the disk. For regular listeners, you will know that I covered this a long time ago across multiple episodes, so I don't want to punish you who listen regularly by covering too much old ground. But you may recall a step in the procedure also required administrators to update their Windows bootable install media. But rather troubling is some reports in the patch management group suggesting they've attempted to preemptively carry out the steps recommended for this KB, but they were unable to, as after completing some steps, they were unable to boot with the WinPE boot media, which is also something I saw confirmed by others on Reddit too. Another step required is a firmware update, which Gunnar Haslinger on Twitter warns should be completed before October 19th, 2026, as there is a certificate for the UEFI Certificate Authority that expires on that date. Michael Niehaus responded, saying that he would expect no issues until the EFI boot file signed with the new cert is deployed to your systems. Already signed files should continue to work fine, but he did add that clear communication from Microsoft will be key. And I saw some other responses to Gunnar's tweets suggesting, well, no, it shouldn't really be an issue when that cert expires. But regardless, there is now a greater emphasis on applying these multiple complicated steps sooner rather than later to protect against another recent vulnerability that Microsoft disabled a fix for due to the Bitlocker recovery key prompts that occurred for some who applied July patches. This is quite a hill for administrators to climb, and there's multiple reasons why you would want to complete these steps if you haven't already. And if you have not actually researched this yet, I suggest you review the advisory and the required steps as soon as possible. And I'll share that with this episode, which again is episode 348, and you'll find it at 5bytespodcast.com. The previously reported mandate for Azure accounts to have MFA enabled is set to be enforced by Microsoft shortly. The requirement applies to all users who perform any create, read, update, delete operations. However, end users who are accessing applications, websites, or services hosted on Azure but not signing into the Azure portal, CLI, or PowerShell are not subject to this requirement. All Entra ID global admins are to be given a 60-day advance notice via email and through Azure Service Help notifications, which I believe I already got that email, so I'd imagine the 60-day window is already ticking. Now I already have it enabled on my accounts anyway. But Microsoft will consider extended timeframes for customers with complex environments or technical barriers, according to a report by InfoSecurityMagazine.com. Customers will need to implement the new MFA requirement on top of any access policies they've configured in their tenants. For organizations that currently have Microsoft defaults enabled or conditional access policy through which users sign into Azure with MFA, users will not see a change to existing login practices. BleepyComputer.com provided an update on one of the several zero-day vulnerabilities patched by Microsoft this month, namely CVE-2024-38193, which has been exploited by the Lazarus hacking group. The group leveraged this now-known vulnerability in the Windows AFD.sys driver to elevate privileges and install the FUD module rootkit on targeted systems. The rootkit helped evade detection by turning off Windows monitoring features. This form of attack is known as a bring your own vulnerable driver attack, and it's when attackers install drivers with known vulnerabilities on targeted machines, which are then exploited to gain kernel-level privileges. Threat actors often abuse third-party drivers, such as antivirus or hardware drivers, which require high privileges to interact with the kernel. The severity of this particular vulnerability is higher because the fact is the driver in question is a Windows driver in the OS, making it harder to flag for endpoint security software because that is a known driver that should be in operation there. The Lazarus hacking group is known to target financial and cryptocurrency firms in multi-million-dollar cyber heists that are used to fund the North Korean government's weapons and cyber programs. The first attack of this kind was discovered in June, so it's still pretty recent, but obviously don't sleep on those Windows updates. Our old friend, the US CISA, has warned of a critical Jenkins vulnerability that could be exploited to gain remote code execution to its catalog of security bugs, warning that it's actively being exploited in attack. Tracked as CVE-2024-23897, this flaw is caused by a weakness in the args4j command parser that unauthenticated attackers can exploit to read arbitrary files on the Jenkins controller file system through the built-in command line interface. BleepyComputer.com reports that there's multiple proof-of-concept exploits published online, and this was just days after Jenkins devs released security updates on January 24th, with some honeypots reportedly catching exploitation attempts just one day after that publication. There's also reports of an increased exploitation rate for this vulnerability around March of this year. More recently, Juniper Networks said last week the ransom EXX gang exploited this vulnerability to breach systems of Brontu Technology Solutions, which provides technology services to Indian banks, and that occurred in late July, so very recently. The ransomware attack caused widespread disruptions to retail payment systems throughout the country, which has prompted the CISA to add the vulnerability to known exploited vulnerabilities catalog just this week. And there are tens of thousands of unpatched Jenkins servers showing online on Shodan. So if you own any of those, you are urged to patch immediately. Toyota have confirmed their network was breached after a threat actor leaked an archive of 240 gigs of data stolen from the company's systems on a hacking forum. Toyota stated to BleepyComputer.com, quote, "We are aware of the situation. The issue is limited in scope and is not a system-wide issue." They also said that the company added that it's engaged with those who are impacted and will provide assistance if needed, end quote. They have yet to provide information on when they discovered the breach and how the attacker gained access and how many people had their data exposed in this incident. While Toyota has not shared the data of the breach, BleepyComputer.com found that files had been stolen or at least created on December 25th, 2022, and this date could indicate that the threat actor gained access to a backup server where the data was stored. This is pretty concerning, as Toyota and some subsidiaries of Toyota have reported other breaches in the past, so this seems to be a really poor trend for them. The popular aviation app FlightAware is asking some users to reset their account login passwords due to a data security incident that may have exposed personal information. The app's vendor stated, quote, "On July 25th, 2024, we discovered a configuration error that may have inadvertently exposed your personal information in your FlightAware account. including user ID, password, and email address, end quote. Additionally, some other data types may have been compromised for some users depending on whether people opted to add them to their accounts, including full name, billing address, shipping address, IP address, social media account, phone number, year of birth, last four digits of credit card number, information about aircraft owned, pilot status, industry and title, account activity, and social security number. FlightAware said that the configuration error has been remediated now, and all account holders whose data has been exposed would be prompted to reset their passwords on their next login on the app. So I don't know why the FlightAware app would require or ask for a social security number. That is interesting. Another instance of social security numbers potentially being leaked. In an update to a story I covered on last week's episode of the podcast, Background Check Service National Public Data has confirmed that attackers did indeed breach their systems after threat actors leaked a stolen database with millions of social security numbers and other sensitive personal information. The company states that the breach data may include names, email addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, and postal addresses. It was previously reported that this could effectively be the leaking of every U.S. citizen's social security number, but at this time, it is yet not confirmed how many individual records have been breached. So that part has not been confirmed, but when I reported last week, the actual company had not confirmed this leak themselves, but now they have. Microsoft has issued a warning to partners that 4 APIs will be retired in September. These are namely a Get Invoice Line Items API, Invoicing and Reconciliation V2 API, Get Invoice Billed Commercial Consumption Line Items, and Get Invoice Unbilled Commercial Consumption Line Items APIs in Azure. Microsoft PM Suresh Deb has stated that the very low adoption rate of the replacement APIs for these APIs is really alarming, because not moving to the new API could cause interruptions for billing reconciliation. The new API is only available for Microsoft Graph Public and Global Cloud for now, as it's not yet available for Azure Government, Azure Germany, or Azure China 2.1 via net. Microsoft has removed the long-standing 32 gig size limit for FAT32 partitions in the latest Windows 11 Canary build, now allowing a maximum of 2 terabytes. Once it reaches the stable channel and becomes widely available, all Windows 11 users will be able to use the format command from a command line prompt to create up to 2 terabyte partitions without having to install any third-party apps or use the PowerShell prompt while logged in using an admin account. Just a reminder though, as pointed out by many when this was announced, the format does still have a 4 gig file size limit, which takes me back to the old floppy disk days. They were the best of times, they were the worst of times. Also in a recent Windows preview is the ability to use your web camera in multiple applications simultaneously, which may seem minor to some out there listening, but I was doing a webinar a few years ago in GoToWebinar, and I tested everything without issue in the green room the day before, but on the day of, my webcam was not being detected in the platform. Something had taken control of the webcam, and I did not have time to reboot my machine or just figure out what process was hanging on to it. So this kind of feature would have been great back then. NeoWin.net reports to use this feature in the preview builds, you must toggle on the multi-app camera feature by going to Settings, Bluetooth and Devices, Camera, then select the camera you want to use and click Advanced Camera Settings. Then you'll see a new window will show up on the screen allowing you to turn on this multi-app camera streaming. ITPro.com reported that just 8% of organizations were enforcing strict return to office mandates that demanded full in-person attendance last year, with just 3% enforcing the same sort of policies this year. On the other end of the spectrum, Flex Index's report found that 79% of a 2,670 people or firms surveyed offered completely flexible working arrangements in 2024, signaling a slight increase from 75% of companies in 2023. The report found that more than half, 56%, of surveyed businesses had an employee's choice model in 2024, which is a form of office attendance policy that allows staff members to shape their working arrangements to their individual needs. This figure was up from 38% in the previous year. By contrast, only 18% of firms are employing a structured hybrid model, in which they mandate which days their workers must attend the office. Fully remote models are also dwindling, though, according to the report. So it certainly seems, at least from this data, that there is more of a move to hybrid, but the employees are being given the flexibility to choose when they come into the office, or at least that's what the data suggests. The article goes on to make some assertions based on the data, but honestly, there's been so many cases to the contrary of this data lately from organizations bringing employees back to the office full time that it's a little hard to believe. But perhaps the large employers are the ones who are mandating a return. Maybe they're an exception, but they get the attention because they're like marquee name companies. Whereas maybe small companies are actually allowing more flexibility, and small companies tend to make up the greatest employment base. They're hiring the most number of employees overall. So it would be interesting to see if that is the case, how things go in the future. Could large companies start losing employees to smaller companies who offer greater flexibility? I guess we'll have to keep an eye out for that. On the AI news front, NeoWin.net reported that OpenAI has launched its fine-tuning feature for developers on all tiers. With the fine-tuning feature, developers would be able to train GPT-4o and GPT-4o mini models using custom datasets to achieve higher performance at a lower cost for specific use cases. Fine-tuning allows developers to change the tone of the model's responses, or even train the model to follow complex domain-specific instructions. OpenAI is offering 1 million training tokens per day for free for every organization for GPT-4o fine-tuning, and 2 million training tokens per day for free for GPT-4o Mini. This offer will be available through September 23rd. GPT-4o fine-tuning training will cost $25 per million tokens, and inference will cost $3.75 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens. So this is very interesting. I guess it's kind of like their form of providing a platform for local AI rather than going out to the public GPT possibly, or at least working within a refined data set. So pretty interesting. Economist.com had an interesting article. It suggests a growing number of investors worry that artificial intelligence will not deliver the vast profits they seek. Since peaking last month, the share prices of Western firms driving the AI revolution, as it's being called, has dropped by 15%. So this is something I touched on our previous episode of the podcast, and even in my AI session that I did at the Cloud Paging user group a few months ago. There is some skepticism growing from just even consumers in regards to AI. And this does pose a threat, but also just its given abilities at the moment are possibly not meeting the expectations of companies who are laying off thousands of employees in order to embrace AI technology. So it would be interesting to see how this develops further too, and if some of those organizations who have made these large changes need to walk back some of those changes and reset their expectations. Now, some may have laid off some of those employees with the excuse of AI, when in actual fact, perhaps it was some performance-related issue. In some quick hit stories to wrap up the news for this week, Microsoft has launched a new unified Teams application that allows Windows and Mac users to switch between personal, work, and education accounts without installing multiple applications. This update is available now for all users and can be downloaded from Microsoft's website, with already installed desktop apps expected to update automatically soon. Ransomware victims have paid a reported $498,800,000 to cyber criminals in the first half of 2024, which seems to set this year apart as a new record for ransomware payments. According to the latest chain analysis report, this increase is due to ransomware gangs focusing on getting larger payments by targeting large organizations to create costly disruptions and the theft of customers' personal data. Over recent weeks, I've been covering the news reports of layoffs at the likes of Intel, Cisco, and more. Well, it has been reported that the total number in the first 8 months of this year alone for tech layoffs affects 132,000 people. Crazy. Finally, on the news for this week, there was speculation earlier this week that Google was set to kill off yet another product, this time the popular Fitbit product line. Google, however, is denying a recent report that is no longer making Fitbit smartwatches. The company spokesperson told Ars Technica that Google has no current plans to discontinue their Fitbit Sense or Fitbit Versa product lines. I saw some comment that the product's days must be numbered since they've actually denied it. That's the first step to eliminating a product, is denying that you're going to eliminate that product, which is just wonderfully skeptical. I'm here for that. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. I actually have multiple scripts, tricks, and tips that I've scripted in this episode, but I'm actually going to do just one because the episode is getting close to 30 minutes long, and I'm trying to keep them below 30 minutes. So the one tip for this week is I saw that Aaron Parker had shared a website, Army Connect, which is a really good explanation of what Azure Virtual Desktop is. So this is specific, I guess, to Army recruits who may be using the service internally within that organization. But it actually serves as a pretty nice explainer just for like layman purposes for anyone. So thanks, Aaron, for sharing that. And that's it for this episode. I'll catch you next week.